Welcome to round number 4 of the FIDE candidates tournament being played in Moscow, and this specific game played on the 15th of March 2016. We have Sergey Karjakin with the white pieces versus Viswanathan with the black pieces. It must be noted that prior to this game, Anand and Karjakin had played each other 26 times in different formats in the game. That's both Blitz, Rapid and Classical. And out of those 26 games, there have been 8 decisive results, and all of them have been in Viswanathan's favor. In other words, Anand was carrying a huge psychological advantage into this game, and what's more, the Karjakin was obviously feeling like he had a just about insurmountable mountain to be playing up. So what does Karjakin do when faced with an insurmountable mountain? Uncork something totally unusual to make sure that he gets Anand out of and away from his opening preparation as soon as possible. And he opened with knight f3, which is the same as what he did against Swidler and Nakamura. And Anand answers with d5, and Karjakin straight away comes back with e3, which is not completely silly, but it's a highly unambitious move, but it takes away quite a bit of flexibility from White's setup and makes the d4 lines pretty harmless. But Karjakin's natural inclination is to avoid all of Anand's home preparation, which is what he managed to do pretty well as far as this is concerned. The game continued with knight f6, c4, e6, b3, bishop e7, bishop e2, castles, knight c3, c5, c takes, knight takes, and the game is now transposed into a fairly well-known position, and it looks to be following some classical games like the ones played by Botvinnik, Larsen, Smyslov, etc. However, Sergey gives this position in the English opening his own more modern touch by playing queen c2, knight c6, and uncorking the novelty of h4. And it's an interesting novelty, this, and the idea behind this move is to prepare for the knight to come out to the outpost of g5 at some point, and force a weakening of the of Black's kingside, but at the same time the move in itself weakens White's kingside pawn structure. So we'll see how that develops in Karjakin's favor. Continuing, d6, a3, f5, bishop e5, bishop e7, knight takes, e takes and d5, d4, rook c8, d takes and c5, b takes and c5, and at long last Karjakin castles short. Continuing, bishop f6, rook f to d1, knight e7, bishop takes an f6, rook takes an f6, and g3. And the position is round about equal at this point, and it's a well-known fact that the side with the isolated or hanging pawns must keep more pieces on the board. So Anand's next move breaks this rule, and it looks clearly like a positional error by playing bishop a6. Which then allows bishop takes and rook takes, so which means that Sergey that's got the more solid pawn structure and fewer hanging pawns. If you notice that the Anand's f pawn is effectively almost hanging at the moment, that one's hanging, and these two aren't doing much to support each other either. So Karjakin's got the better pawn structure, and therefore he will benefit by the removal of more pieces of the board. Game continuing, queen c3, rook b6, rook a to c1, queen d6. Another inaccuracy by Anand, and all of these small inaccuracies will eventually add up to be something more decisive. The queen is not very well placed on d6, and as Sergey already shows with knight e5, with threatening moves like knight c4 and knight d3. So obviously the knight does come to e5, rook b7, and it bounces all the way across to d3. And this is what we were talking about. The hanging pawns now become super weak. The c5 pawn needs to advance, but that's just going to become a pain, because as the c5 pawn advances, the d5 pawn becomes a backward hanging and isolated pawn, as does the f pawn that hasn't got any support as yet. c4, d takes a c4, rook takes a c4, queen e5, and the queens have to be exchanged, which is again a positional step in Karjakin's favor. Queen takes an e5, knight takes an e5, rook takes an c1, rook takes an c1, and white is clearly better at this point. Better placed rook, better pawn structure, and a clear plan on improving his king position. The rest, as I say, is a matter of technique for a player that is as strong as what Karjakin is. And we'll just run through briefly the solid technique of how to convert this way stronger position. We've got g6, rook c5, king g7, rook a5, king f6, knight d3, rook c7, rook a6 with check, king g7, knight f4, rook d7, king f1, king, knight g8, knight e6 with check, king f7, knight d4, knight e7, knight to b5, knight c8, a4, rook d7, rook c6, knight e7, rook a6, knight c8, rook c6, knight e7, rook d6, rook b6, rook d7, a6, and knight c3. And in this position, Anand resigned the game. And although it's materially equal, it's clear to see that with the two, especially taking into account the two hanging pawns that can't be defended for much longer, those pawns are going to be falling, and that will leave with Karjakin with a clear passer that will be able to seal the game. For instance, after knight c3, a continuation could be rook e6, knight takes on d5, there the first pawn falls, king e8, rook takes on e7, rook takes on e7, knight takes on e7, king takes on e7, and now that the major pieces are off the board, you can see on the king side of the board we'll be left with a 4 versus 3 pawn situation on the king side, and if Anand takes up, utilizes his king to be able to try and defend the 4 versus 3, Karjakin's king will be able to get into behind, and then the a6 pawn falls, and the a4 pawn will be able to march through. So, taking everything into account, completely best position, Anand resigned. Karjakin picks up his first ever win against the Indian Grandmaster, and that, my friend, is how the game was won. Feel free to post any comments, questions, criticisms you have in the comment section down below this video. Remember, thumbs up if you like the content, share it out amongst all your friends, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below the video to stay subscribed to my channel for all the new chess content that comes at you just about daily. Remember to stay carved up for the win in your games, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.